What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another What I Watched Last Month. Last month being April of 2024, and this is probably the most I've seen in theaters in a long time. We saw 6 movies in theaters. Every one of these I did an individual video on, pretty much. I saw Monkey Man. I thought was pretty good. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. It had some good action moments, but definitely had some weak moments as well. I saw Civil War, and I personally loved this film. I thought it was a great look at journalism, but also had some really intense and really brutal moments. I thought Kirsten Dunst did an amazing job. I thought the film looked great, really impactful. I love the audio design to really make the gunfire as visceral as possible, and I give it an 8 out of 10. I really can't wait to see this one again. I also saw Abigail. This is a movie that I did a video on where I was talking about how the trailer just kind of completely spoiled the entire movie, and I still feel that way. I think it's a pretty fun vampire movie that has some decent moments, and I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. I also saw Sasquatch Sunset, and I love this movie. I know this movie is kind of weird. It's very gross. It's no dialogue, just following around some Sasquatches, same squanching around, and I had a really good time with it. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. This is another one that I honestly really want to see again. I also saw The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, and I feel this one's kind of a bummer that it didn't do as well. Okay, get my head bobbing going here. This one's kind of a bummer it didn't do as well, because I think this is a really fun, over the top Guy Ritchie movie, being Guy Ritchie, where it's just a super fun blockbuster. I had a really good time with this one. I really enjoyed it, and not a lot of people saw it, unfortunately. I definitely will be picking this up when it comes out. This is, when I talk about a big popcorn blockbuster movie, this is exactly what I'm talking about. And I did videos on each one of these movies, so if you want to check out a little bit more in-depth review on each one of those, you can check out my channel, because they're all there. The last film I saw in theaters was Pesadilla. This is Dylan Englund's new film, and I'm just going to throw this out here. Anytime I talk about one of his films, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I have become friends with Dylan. As I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible, I feel like there's probably always going to be an inherent kind of biasy toward that because of that. So anything I say about his films, take with a grain of salt. But I had a really good time checking this one out, and the whole trip. We did a documentary short film on it.
We're in Kentucky now. What cryptids have they got in Kentucky? Say the Colonel. I was out in the middle of the woods, and all I heard was his finger licking. Yeah. So I started puckering my butt and ran.
Is the Colonel a skinwalker?
He's a skin cruncher.
It's basically a vlog, all right? It's basically a vlog. I called it a documentary to make it sound more important than it actually is. But we had a really good trip. It was really fun. It was great to meet Dylan and the gang in person. And I honestly think Pesadilla so far is his best work that I've seen. I think this film is super ambitious. I think it should be hallmarked up there as one of those films that should be like a study of how you can do a lot with very, very little. This film was made about $20,000. It's incredibly ambitious for the budget that it had, and I think it did some really, really great things. It really does showcase, I think personally, how much talent Dylan actually has as a director, and I honestly can't wait to see what he does next. I think he's got a bright future in film, in my opinion. But yeah, definitely check out Pesadilla whenever it comes out, and if you want to check out Dylan's YouTube channel, I'm going to link it down below. So those are everything I saw in theaters. Let's talk about some things I streamed. A rewatch for me on YouTube was The Interview, or Percival and Lewis Talk About Employment, and I talked about this last month. I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. I still stand by that 7.5 out of 10. I ended up rewatching it because my wife hadn't watched it, so she wanted to watch it, and we watched it, and yeah, I still stand by it. I think it's a good little short film that is basically 2 people talking. I think the dialogue's good, and I think Dylan did a good job of utilizing a lot of different camera work or camera angles in a way to help utilize a really small space. I think it's good. I think it's funny. I definitely think it's worth watching. It's on his YouTube channel. I'm going to link it down below. Also, to keep talking about Dylan, another film that I watched was Banned from Broadcast, the movie Saiko the Large Family. I did a video on this. If you want to check that out, you can go check that out. I'm going to keep my thoughts kind of short here. I watched it. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 6 out of 10. Then I rewatched it. I actually watched this one twice. This whole movie is available on YouTube if you want to check it out, but it is a mockumentary that follows a documentarian who goes to this family's house, and there's some weird things going on. Now, this is a film that I thought was decent the first time I watched it, but I got a lot more out of it on a second viewing, and it's one of those ones that it's formed a lot of fun conversation in the comments to the video I made about it. It's a pretty cool movie that has a lot of cool behind this, I wouldn't say behind the scenes, but I guess background meanings, a lot of things for you to dig for, and a lot of things for you to interpret. It's definitely a pretty cool movie, and I definitely recommend checking it out. And I bumped my rating up from a 6 to a 7.5. I also watched Once Upon a Studio. This is a short film for Disney to celebrate their 100 years. This was the short film to accompany Wish, and You know what I mean? This short film really services nothing other than like, hey, look, there's my favorite character. Outside of that, it does nothing. It doesn't really feel like a celebration of Disney as much as it does just kind of a memberberry overload of Disney in a way. There's nothing here to like celebrate the animation or talk about the animation. It's just literally characters that you've seen before wandering around, and there's nothing to this short film. It's a 5 out of 10. It's definitely one of those ones where I could feel like somebody who is obsessed with Disney could watch it and probably get a little bit more out of it than what I did. But yeah, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. And then we watched Wish, which was really bad. This might be one of Disney's worst films in my opinion. This film about Asha going to try to work for the king of this kingdom, who basically is like a wizard who captures everybody's wishes and then like occasionally grants somebody their wish. And it's really boring. First off, the music is god awful. The music in this movie is super bad. It's trying to be like one of those Disney musicals, but the thing is like it feels like they recorded the instruments and the vocals completely separate and then just mushed them together. Like the people singing did not have the instrumentals, and it's bad. It's really bad musically. The characters are super flat. There's no interesting characters. The acting and the singing I personally think is bad. The animation looks awful. It looks very cheap, and I get what they're going for in terms of like some of the textures. They're trying to go for this like not quite like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse kind of thing, but they're trying to go for like a storybookish kind of look to it, and it doesn't work. It comes off really cheap. And I saw a video breaking down to why some people think this movie looks cheap, and I think it might be actually pretty accurate. Basically, they're saying there's like no motion blur, which is something that like straight to video kind of movies do to try to save time and budget. And I definitely feel like that's probably the case here. Also, characters don't feel like they're actually in the environment. The environment feels like a printed out backdrop, and the characters are just juxtaposed into it. And it doesn't feel like a living world. And it doesn't even really come across a feeling like a storybook either. The film is insanely predictable. I called the ending literally like within like 5 minutes of the film. The film is full of just memberberries to try to like inflated scope of the film. The main conflict feels like a complete waste when the story could have just been a great full circle kind of moment. There's just literally nothing original here. It's very derivative. It doesn't feel like a celebration of Disney, but kind of feels more like a dull corporate manufactured algorithm than being anything creative or wonderful that you might think about when you think of like old Disney, which is kind of funny because it kind of does feel like a reflection of the current state of Disney. But I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. I thought it was terrible. I also watched Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. I think at some point I called it The Scavenger, but The Scargiver, which it just sounds way cringier. I did a review on this. If you want to check out my more in-depth thoughts of this, you can check it out there. I think this movie was garbage. I think it was absolutely terrible. It's a 2 out of 10. I think both of these Rebel Moon movies are horrendous. It's a 2 out of 10. Not a fan of it. A film I watched on Peacock was Migration. This is the duck animation movie by Illumination, and like it's like right in the middle. It's like one of those movies like right in the middle. Like, yeah, the animation looked cheap, but like the family dynamics are actually here. The characters are pretty well developed. The story about paranoid ducks never migrating for winter and finally doing it only to be basically like have a disastrous migration opens the window up for a lot of fun moments, and I think it utilizes it in a decent way. The voice acting is pretty good throughout the film, and there are some funny jokes stapled in here occasionally, but it's just like one of those movies that's never offensively bad or never really that great either. It's like just one of those ones that is just right down the middle. It's one that like in a couple years I'll forget that I even watched it. I definitely don't regret giving my time to it, but I probably wouldn't watch it again. I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. You can check it out on Peacock if you want to. The last thing I streamed on AMC Plus, I think it's also on Shudder, was Jacob's Wife from 2021. This is a film that was sent to me by a buddy who was like, hey, this is actually pretty decent. And you know what? It is. It's actually a pretty cool little vampire movie that decides to kind of lean into the drama rather than the horror, as Jacob's wife is bitten and turned into a vampire. And now you have this like dilemma of, all right, well, how do you deal with it as a not only a religious man but also a devout husband? Like, how do you deal with this problem? And I love the direction they took the story that kind of helped it stand out rather than it being a pretty generic vampire flick. The score and the main theme I really enjoyed throughout the film, and while the film definitely has a cheaper look to it overall, it makes up for it with solid performances and some good and fun practical effects. This feels like it's more of a look at marriage than vampirism, but there's a conflict towards the third act that feels really unwarranted, that kind of stood out as cheesy and an otherwise like pretty grounded film. This feels like one of those like little hidden gems of a film, and I definitely recommend checking it out. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Now on to the things I watched that I physically own, and that was honestly just a ton of Planet of the Apes. I just watched a bunch of Planet of the Apes. I watched the 2001 Tim Burton Planet of the Apes for the screen to console. I think this movie is absolutely horrendous. Completely misses the point of Planet of the Apes, and then has a terrible forced plot twist that was just awful. I have the Legacy collection, which is funny. Planet of the Apes, I think I still have the anniversary DVD special, like 2-disc collection that comes with a buttload of features, but I also have this entire set on VHS, which I think is really cool. I don't know if I would want to watch at least the first film in VHS, because the first film is beautifully shot. The first film from 1967 honestly is one of my favorite films of all time. It's one of my favorite science fiction films of all time. It actually might be my favorite science fiction film of all time. It would have to be, it's like somewhere around there with like A New Hope and Blade Runner for me personally. I think this film is absolutely fantastic. I love the ideas presented here of some of the not only like philosophy that's presented here, but also some of the theology that's presented here. The way the characters look in this movie is fantastic. I love the masks, I love the costumes, and yes, you can go, I can see the actors' teeth for real, or I can see their lips. You can see like how the mask is at some points coming off a little bit from the eyes, but that adds to this charm and almost like in a weird way, this like, at least for me, kind of like surrealist look to the film that I adore. And that is one thing I will say about Tim Burton's movie. I did like some of the makeup, not all of it, but I did like some of it. I also rewatched Beneath the Planet of the Apes. I wanted to get through this entire set, but I just didn't end up having time to do so. I've seen these all before. I think Beneath the Planet of the Apes is actually a pretty solid sequel, but where I would give the first film a 10 out of 10, I would give Beneath the Planet of the Apes a 6 out of 10. I think it's good, but it is a film with a lot of nothing. The film is, a lot of it is a repeat as Brent lands to try to find Taylor, and we run through a lot of the same tropes and a lot of the same story beats as the first film, but where I think this film becomes truly special is the third act of the film, when we start to go underground and beneath the Planet of the Apes. That's when this film, I think, actually turns into something really fantastic and is a really, really great counterpiece to the first film. Now, like I said, I've seen the other ones before. I think Escape from Planet of the Apes is terrible. I think it's really goofy. It's not very good, but I do like Conquest, and I do like Battle for the Planet of the Apes as well. And I did want to try to rewatch them. I will probably actually rewatch them in May, just whenever I get time to. I've just not had a lot of time to watch movies here recently, so I would like to finish this out. But I did get to go through, before we go see Kingdom, hopefully this weekend, the new Apes trilogy. So Rise, Dawn, and War for the Planet of the Apes. Rise of the Planet of the Apes is a great way to reboot a franchise while staying very faithful to the original source material and presenting something new and interesting as well. The CGI is great, despite being old at this point. Like, this is a, what is it, 2011 movie? So this CGI is very old, very dated. There are some moments where that comes across, but a lot of the film looks very, very good still to this day. I personally love this film. I think it is a great way to reboot a franchise, and I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Now on to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. This is personally my second favorite film in the entire Apes franchise. This film is phenomenal through and through, in my opinion. This is a film, I can't get the Walmart sticker off. I tried to. This is a film that follows up Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but it continues the story in a very fascinating way, and you'll see that through this entire franchise, how it just carries the story in a very interesting way. But to watch the power dynamic between the apes start to form, you see the struggle of humanity, the last like almost gasp of humanity that you will definitely see in the next movie, but you can see that struggle point, and then it's bolstered by just insanely thrilling action set pieces. Koba is such a great villain throughout this movie. The mocap art, like mocap work, the performances in the mocap are absolutely fantastic, and this film, the CGI is still to this day unbelievable to me. There are a few moments that's kind of noticeable, but I mean, considering this movie is 10 years old now, it is phenomenal CGI, and there are moments that just is still to this day breathtaking. Beautifully shot, beautifully directed, great score. Love this film. 9 out of 10. On to the last film, War for the Planet of the Apes. This film is also super good. This being kind of the tail end of the Caesar trilogy in a way, where we really get to see the last gasp of humanity in this film. The CGI, the designs of the monkeys. There are scenes even to this day, where I go, that's got to be like a real monkey. You know, it's like, it's that seamless. It's that flawless. It is, to this day, still insanely beautiful to look at when it comes to the cinematography and the CGI and how they blended all these elements together. It is seamless. If you really want a great look at the scene with Maurice and the child. It's just, it's unbelievable. It really is. It's unbelievable. I love the direction to kind of tone this story back. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was a huge, large-scale monster of a film, and War of the Planet of the Apes, we spent a lot of time just hunting down revenge, very small group, and yeah, the end of it is a very large-scale thing, but it is kind of toned back from Dawn, but I think that works better in the story for Caesar, personally. I think this movie is an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's great. I think this new trilogy of Planet of the Apes movies is utterly fantastic, but that has been everything I've watched in April of 2024. Not a ton of movies, not a ton of stuff. I'm hoping May will be a little bit more packed, but considering we're like 2 weeks into May or whatever, like right now we're like a week and a half into May and I've watched, I think, one movie. It's not going great, but if you guys want to support what I do, you can consider becoming a member or patron. Subscribe if you want, and I will see y'all next time. Bye, everybody.